Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And let's start talking about the perils of content switching. This is a lead dev webinar created in partnership with Coder. Now, the webinar is going to last roughly 45 minutes. And at the end, we all going to go in Slack, so in the engineering velocity channel. So if there are some unanswered questions, please, send it anyway, and we're going to respond on Slack. We're gonna try to respond to as many questions anyway during the webinar at the end, but just in case if something is late but we don't have time because it's luck. Let me start with some of the introduction. So first, my name is Simone. I'm currently head of engineering in a company in UK called Kraken, that is part of the Octopus Energy Group. And I'll be joined today by an incredible list of panelists. We have Leslie, we have Luca, we have Nick, and we have Tim, and I'll just stop and let them introduce themselves. Luca, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the panel. Looking forward for the conversation. I'm a technologist with 20 years of experience, been working with early stage, scale ups, and also enterprises. So I've been working a bit on every stage of the growth and the different challenges you have when you're growing a technology organization, a different stage of your business growth, and as well as leading teams and organization. I've also helped as advisor of some of these companies in the ecosystems to grow and achieve success and being great at building their product that the customers love.
Thank you, Luca. Leslie, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm currently a staff engineer at the New York Times. I'm on our SRE team, specifically tech leading the reliability platforms team. And before that, I was primarily in education technology as an engineer, did some stints at a couple of ed tech startups, worked on Google for Education, especially during the pandemic transition for remote learning, which was super awesome. And yeah, I've spent the last like 5+ years being a tech lead. So you'll hear me talking a lot about that today.
Thank you. Nick.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for being here. I currently lead engineering at MedScout. We're a Series A startup, so small team focusing on sales enablement in the health tech space. But I've been leading remote engineering teams for more than 10 years now. So before the pandemic, I really love remote leadership, and we'll probably be talking about this particular topic a lot from that angle today.
And last but not least, Tim.
Hi, my name's Tim Quinlan. I'm a technical marketer at a company called Coder. Our product is a cloud development environment. It's a tool that a lot of large engineering organizations use to eliminate or reduce context switching and eliminate developer friction. So,
thank you, Tim, and welcome you all. So, just to give a bit of context on the topic, so I want to frame it in terms of engineering efficiency. So, obviously, efficiency nowadays is a huge topic. While often is taken consideration mostly from a performance management perspective, there is another big angle that is creating an environment where actually people can actually do their best work. Now, context switching is certainly one of the area where it's common in modern society. We all have to juggle with that. But we often, I ask myself, is if it's necessary, if what is its impact, trying to understand it and trying potentially to minimize it. So before we go into more deep question, I really want to go through and ask all of you what's your team take or your take on context switching? How is it perceived in your company? Is it a concern? Because I suspect that it's going to be different depending on your context. But let's start with Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about context switching, especially in an early stage company, is there's no small part of it that's essential, because you have a small engineering team, a small support or customer success team. There's constantly requests coming in from support and sales. And so engineering is inevitably going to get pulled in all of those directions while trying to ship software at the same time. So I think it's one of those things where it's not really productive to go, how can we eliminate context switching? How can we get rid of all context switching? Because that would actually be counterproductive. It would be bad for the business to do that. I think the question that I find myself asking on a regular basis is, are there things that I can do as a leader or in the way that we operate our team to give the folks on the team more time to get into flow, to get into deep work? while still supporting the needs of the business to be responsive to customers.
Leslie, what's your take? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I think so. On my team specifically, we definitely have a philosophy that some amount of context switching is going to be a necessary evil. I think given that we're focused on reliability, so DevOps is a huge part of our culture, of course, and what we're trying to also extend across the entire company. Definitely we use sort of techniques and whatnot from that space to eliminate some of the like context switching that we wouldn't necessarily have, especially like so things like having automation in place for things that we wouldn't need. We could automate otherwise and spend some time on other work, right? Especially during like on-call shifts. So one thing that we do, for example, is also like we have strong boundaries on like the type of work that you can do during on-call, like having that separated from project work. So that's the way teams or members aren't having to sort of hold both in tension. So we definitely have a philosophy, like some is necessary. I think the biggest problem for us is sort of figuring out like what is too much versus too little. Like that is very much ambiguous. And I think I think that's why we're here. So that's the biggest question for us is really gauging like how, like what's an appropriate level, especially because that often changes depending on like the project that we're working on or like that, that year's initiatives, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense. And a few things that you say are quite connected to what we're going to talk about later. So perfect. Team, what about you?
We work with a bunch of different companies who have software engineers, and they're all going through the same thing, right? Like they're moving from project to project, or they're suffering from long onboarding times, or simply going from a call to a stand up to flow time and back and forth all day long. And like I said, that our tools aim to just eliminate any friction in getting your development environment set up and running quickly. It eliminates a lot of those. We aim to eliminate a lot of those. A lot of those problems of, well, I'm working on project A today. Tomorrow's project B, and well, I got to install this tool, or I have to run this Nix environment, or I have to do this or that. Coder kind of eliminates all those problems where we have, we can define separate workspaces for people to use. Everything's declarative. Everything's really consistent. So, you eliminate a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts work that goes along with it. So.
And Luca, what's your take on context switching? And
yeah, I'm a mix of all I've been said so far. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think that I share with Nick the perspective about what is essential context switching. I try to separate in my mind between what is essential and accidental context switching, because as we think we all agreeing, our degree of context switch is required, both at the macro level. There's a CTO, like I want people to be able to join I don't know, a presentation about a new piece of product discovery, although that will break the flow of the current work stream. But that to me is essential context switch, and I encourage all the time. But then there's the accidental, actually, where actually there's too many information coming in at the same time, or some of the example that Les and Tim highlighted about maybe the tooling is not there, or maybe some of the agreement of what can be worked can be done. And that to me is sometimes accidental at the macro level. So very important. It's important to help understand there is not a one-size-fits-all. I think this is the part that is important for the engineering organization to appreciate that it's not a one-size-fits-all. They have to build a sixth sense to make a judgment, because also you as a leader, you're not going to be there every single time to shield the conversation, right? To block and like. So you want people to build that common sense as a group and really facilitate the conversation between each other. And then as a leader, you decide where you work at which level, like the team level, sometimes organizational changes. The organization is going to get very, very complicated. It's complex. You have to move a lot of things. Even there, the pragmatism, how to organization is critical. But it's definitely an area that if you intervene in the right way, you have great wins. You're moving from being efficient to being impactful. because all of a sudden things flow much more effectively. And this is, to me, is the big transformation, the big change you can do when working on context switching.
Okay. Let me follow up on this last point, Luca. Can you, we chat before and you told me you have a couple of stories. Do you remember like a time where actually this became a priority? And, we don't have to name names or anything, but, like a general, with the context, what happened, why it became a priority, and
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, we all have probably different experiences and stories about when context switch became too much for a team, for an individual, or for even to the organization. For me, there are a couple of elements that I need to keep an eye on, and I want to use as a radar to understand when to intervene. And some can also attach to some examples and story. Well, to me, the first signal I'm looking at is like, are we moving towards our goal effectively? So, because in any organization, doesn't matter the stage, everyone is very busy. There's always something to do. There's always more things to do than time. But we all have some plans, short term, mid-term, long term. And my first check is like, are we moving toward our mid long term with a degree of pace? If we are not, then I need to think, is there a context switch problem? There are a number of scenarios like a more in scale-ups organization where at times your planning has to be more complex because you're moving a larger customer base, you're moving, you're impacting a bigger revenue, you're probably also tackling a bigger problem. So you need to start aligning more teams. And I could see that teams were struggling to go through the plan, even if it's loose. And so the exercise there is start understanding what it was distracting them from going into operating, having that impact. On the other side of the spectrum, like more slightly early stage businesses, right? Often you find yourself in a place where there are so many opportunities for innovations that you get very good at starting, but not very good at finishing this in general. So you actually, you start opening new threads, right? You start opening new opportunities rather than closing the existing ones. And this is also even more common in my experience in early stage on technical problem. So while you're also opening up new product features, product streams, amazing, you also have so much to build on the foundational, CI/CD, MLOps, you name it, observability, you name it, you're going to be something. And often I see opportunities, opportunities in early stage where actually people are coming up, say, hey, we have a problem. We have a problem in this space, say MLOps, we're going to fix it. We want to fix it, and we're going to fix it tomorrow. And the reality is that you need to work with the team because the problem is real and the solution could be very impactful, but you need to navigate with them about, if we start today, this is not a day exercise. This is a multi-weeks, maybe months to get to something value. Let's work together. So what you're doing, you're just adjusting the flow, so that you don't break what you're doing to jump on a new theme. Because anyway, you're going to have a new theme, appearing in your radar the day after. So you need to build that a bit of discipline in going through that. And helping the team and the organization to see it's not that we don't care about CI/CD, MLOps, observability, technical task or technical layer that we need to take care of, but we want to talk about and tackle the more impactful way, not just as another stream starting. So I think this is probably a lot to hear Nick that is also working in an early stage business, right? Like, how does it see that? Because this is, to me, happens often. And, the bandwidth that these new streams take is way bigger than what the organization can take. It's not just the destruction or changes, like the bandwidth is massive. So you need to navigate that. And the whole goal at the end is like, we're talking about this, I talk about impact and moving forward. The measure there is about your cycle time. Do you try to get from when you start something to an end in a reasonable, whatever reasonable means in this context, or this is just, expanding a little bit by little bit? And this is the other measure that I keep an eye and try to improve.
Makes sense. And actually, let me follow on something that you just said. I find it's quite interesting. Nick, what have you ever tried to measure directly or indirectly the impact of context switching? Because it's not something easy to measure directly in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge is that there's not really a good direct measure. How many different things are you working on a day? I mean, you can ask engineers to track time, but that's a good way to lose your engineering team. Nobody wants to do that. Um, I liked that you mentioned cycle time. That's the metric that I've found to be best. You know, how long from the point that we decide to start working on something does it take for it to come out the other end of the system and be live in production? Because if you're working on too many things at the same time, it's going to stretch out. And it's one of those metrics that's sort of hard to use because you're really only baselining against your own team. And every time you add somebody new to the team, every time something changes about your engineering process, it's going to fundamentally impact your cycle time as well. And so getting the noise out of the metric and understanding how much of it is actually pointing to context switching, problematic context switching, is pretty hard. I also tend to be I'm more of a Kanban style process person. I like that more than Scrum for most teams, especially early stage when you're looking to innovate, because it does have room for you to throw things in process when you're ready to work on them. There's no defined way work comes in and defined ceremonies that work has to follow. It can be a little bit more flexible. But if you do that, you're prone to the exact problem that Luca called out in that you can start working on way too many things at the same time. And so the other tool that I constantly find myself pulling out of my tool chest is WIP limits and making sure that we have not a hard limit, but at least a high watermark where if we've got 6 things in flight for a team of 6 people, we should probably have a discussion about why we have so many things in flight and what's close to finishing and what we can do to get that cognitive load down a little bit more.
I like to maybe to add on to the Kanban because I think is a very good point. I think that I have a strong preference as well. And because it's so hard to measure, have a direct measure that is not indirect. I think that if you have a Kanban, it's more a feeling that you have than a hard metrics about how the content switches, is how much you're able to deliver value on a regular basis to your end user. Now, because at times you can always wrap up your cycle of delivery and delivering something, but is there something of a tangible improvement towards, on your segmentation, your customer base? And if you're focused, so you have a less content switch, actually on each iteration there's an iteration of value for real. And that to me is always, you feel it when it's there. And that is maybe not very scientific, but also very pragmatic, and also often is perceived by the organization as well. So it's easier to convey and reconnect with the rest of the organization about improvement, and because some of the work that you have to do to make it better, are a bit obscure from other people in the organization about why you're doing these things. Like, well, this is why. Now you can see that, you can feel it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There is a fundamental difference in managing an early stage team and a much larger organization in that metrics are much less useful when a team is small. It's going to be much more anecdotal, much more vibes based, for lack of a better way to explain it. And then when you get to like a 100-person engineering team, you can look at the metrics and make a little bit more sense of them because you're large enough that the law of averages comes into play and smooths the data out for you.
Yes, I would agree. So let me summarize where we are right now. So Luca mentioned about essential versus accidental complexity, and I wanted to look at another angle, that is what create content switching. You all mentioned one aspect of it. So on one end, there are more organizational cultural elements of it. You may have too many things that you're working on. Your calendar could be very fragmented, or you may get blocked, especially where you have multiple teams that get blocked from each other. That causes context switching. But there is also like another function that is in my mind, that is the very long feedback loop. Like you have a very long build, it takes ages to deploy. Like this is also cause context switching, because what do you do while you wait? So then my next question, and Leslie, I would begin to ask that to you, is that if we talk about from an organizational cultural perspective, what have you implemented? Because you mentioned a few things before to minimize content switching for your team.
Yeah, so the way I think of it is sort of and there was a similar framework as someone mentioned earlier today about but so my framework is, it's like of 3, which is like there's kind of there's more preventative work that you can do to like avoid having to context switch, and then there's proactive where it's a little bit more ambiguous, like, but it's sort of in that medium term phase. And then there's the like reactive, which is like, oh man, we're in a bad situation. We're context switching too much. Like, what do we do? So I've done all three across all three. On the preventative side, I mean, honestly, a lot of it does end up, I think, going back to sort of like architecture practices and design too, because like one thing that's really central to, I think, my work is establishing strong like service boundaries, for example, like strong ownership. Like strong ownership over services is super crucial for us. And we definitely saw the like downside of not having that be the case during the general election for at the times where we had a lot of context switching that needed to be done because like we had no like the source of truth on who owns X service wasn't always there. And like especially between like reorgs where things don't necessarily get transferred, transitioned properly and whatnot. But sort of that speaks to the preventative sort of way where you can like make sure that you have strong boundaries from the beginning, and that should help sort of at least navigate some of the complexity on the systems level. And naturally that transitions, I think, to like the organizational level, right? Like how teams are organized. And this whole only becomes more and more complex as like it's a large organization, like has been said. So there's those aspects. And then I mentioned on call, to sort of like compartmentalize like the times for context switching or for being able to do that proactive work. So that's kind of the on-call shifts I very much use sort of strategically as like, all right, here are the sort of proactive things that we can do to prevent, context switching and whatnot. That doesn't involve like a huge initiative behind it, right? Like doing small automation tasks, improving our documentation because that enables us to share context and the like process of sharing context, I think, is often where a lot of time goes into, right? Um, so I think that's been another tactic. And then this is me. Oh, and then standardization has been a big one for me as well. Just because I think that provides like shared language that makes it easier to have conversations that just literally take less time. Like when we're operating on the same definition of even something as simple as like a service, like it's a single unit of deployment, like that. So even things as simple as that aren't always like agreed upon on the definition. So for us, like a lot of it has been also establishing like what do we actually mean when we say like a microservice, so like sort of those even fundamental um, concepts. So yeah, that's a lot, but I'll stop there and let someone else speak.
Yeah, to follow up with that, you mentioned like who owns what and who's responsible for this and who's responsible for that. One of the big things or one of the large tools a lot of people are using now are software catalogs or developer platforms, whatever you want to call them. And they do eliminate a lot of that friction getting in. However, they skip over a lot of things like tooling deployment, tooling configuration, so you'll see a software catalog entry and it'll say, well, before you get started, by the way, read this wiki or talk to this person to get this, tool, whatever it is. So if you can integrate and define or declare your development environments right into your software catalog entries, that goes a long way. So that takes away that sort of, the finding, the configuration, the deployment, and then the actual, coding. You can skip right over that where you find it and then you're coding. We have actually an integration plugin for Backstage, and some of the people who are using it absolutely love it because it literally fills in all those slots that an IDP doesn't really do. Right?
Yeah, one of the things you said that I really liked, Leslie, was the idea of compartmentalizing the context switching, like through an on-call rotation. We do that in a couple of ways, and it's been super helpful. One of them, we have a formal triage rotation. So as requests come in from customer success and sales, there's one engineer that gets those. Because, when you hire engineers that want to be part of an early stage startup, part of why they want to do it is to be close to the customer, to be super responsive. And it's pretty easy to end up in a situation where one of those tickets rolls in and everybody on the team jumps into it and you've interrupted 8 people, not one. And so that's been super powerful in sort of tamping down that dynamic a little bit. And then the more interesting one that we've done from a blog post that Ben Darfler at Honeycomb posted a while back on the stand-up is dead and here's what to do instead. He proposed this idea of a 1-hour daily team sync, which sounds wild. We're going to put a 1-hour meeting on every engineer's calendar every day. But what it ends up doing is defragmenting everybody's calendar because all of the team's business runs through that one meeting. And there's no, let's take this offline. Let's schedule 30 minutes later. People from outside the team know that rhythm. When they need to speak to the engineering team, they'll join that meeting. It's very agenda driven, and it's given most engineers a day where the things that they have on their calendar, they have the 1 hour daily team sync, and then once a week they'll have a 30-minute one-on-one with me, and that's about it. And so there's a lot more flexibility to build their work rhythm and routine because they know that they're not going to get a flow block fragmented by some other meeting.
Very interesting. I didn't hear about it, so thank you. Then let's move on to the other aspects. So I mentioned the organizational cultural aspect, and I suspect there is much more to talk about it. If we move instead and talk about the more technical aspect, so team, I was wondering, among your clients, what kind of like approaches or techniques have you found that particularly effective in reducing the cognitive load of context switching? I certainly have a few that are on top of my mind, so I want to hear what you've seen.
It's like we said earlier, there is no one size fits all solution to this, right? That each one of our clients does things differently. Some of the more interesting, setups are, rather than, obviously we're decoupling everything away from the developer's machine. We're putting it as a cloud instance. Everything's declared or declarative, everything's consistent, everything's ready to go. The cool thing about CDEs is you can do just about anything on them, right? So if you have those people who are building like a microservice work-alike type thing on their laptop with, you name it, a local Kubernetes or Docker Compose or something like that, you can do that with a CDE. But the neat thing about it is, rather than everybody having to do and maintain their own setup, you write it once and you deploy it per individual. If there's an update, you go in and you change it and they're all ready to go. So you can almost integrate the configuration and the deployment like into the planning phase, like if you're in a DevOps loop, right? So at the very end of the planning phase, you say, hey, what do our developers need to be successful in this next sprint, right? And then you can integrate that into the declaration of the workspace, and away they go. We also have software houses where people are jumping back and forth between projects like crazy. Some are on different operating systems, some are, completely different languages or completely different configurations, and that all is pretty easy to eliminate with a CDE. Even things like doing full-blown desktop software, you can do it if you have a graphical workspace. That's a pretty easy way to go. Like you can imagine, like if you have people who are using Macs or Linux machines, and then they have to, maybe tweak a Windows desktop client, then you're talking about like some kind of bizarre VDI thing, or they're going to have a VM on their machine, or whatever. Like those are things you definitely want to avoid. And like I said, the theme is just smoothing out any friction, right, that they need to get from one point of their work to the next. And onboarding, whether it's bringing a person new into the company or bringing a new person on to the project, is where our customers definitely see a huge gain. And the lack of maintenance as well. So now you're eliminating, those context switches throughout the month or throughout the sprint, however you want to measure it, of, well, I need to update my environment, I need to change my environment, whatever. That all goes right out the window. We surveyed a lot of developers from our clients a while ago, and we found that they were spending maybe a quarter of their sort of work time, like their non-meeting time, their non-Zoom call, non-stand-up, non-documentation reading, like whatever, like their actual technical time, they're spending up to a quarter of it maintaining their environment, right? So if you could literally eliminate that's one context switch out, you're going to gain 33% right away, right? So it's like we said, it's not one size fits all. There are no cookie cutter answers. People do get creative, and we see some very interesting things, but at the macro scale, everybody kind of has the same issues, but at the micro scale, they're all different, if that makes sense. So.
But it's quite interesting to, the conversation we're having, that, the point that Tim is doing and the, kind of the micro level of the development flow and that cycle, the fact that you can capture this standard, put in the cloud, and you're ready to go, is pretty much the same recommendation also as Leslie was suggesting about standards, about the macro level architecture, like, oh, we need to agree what a microservice is. So I think that, we're kind of in agreement all that a degree of standardization or discoverability of things, right, or repeatability of activities is definitely helping getting that flow and avoiding those, the waste of time and the context which is not required, like by automation, documentation, or even culture. I think that, Simone, you ask about what you're doing. It's a lot of sometimes really working also with the team and helping that, hey, the good old, you do something manually first, that's fine. The second time you should still do it manually. By the third time, probably it's time to automate. If something has happened the third time, go for automation. And when you automate it, you don't automate for yourself, you automate for the team. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but give it back, right? So we go back to the conversation where actually you have whatever's going to be, your configuration, your script available to the group. And then together you incrementally make it better. And sometimes it's like a kickoff part of the project, like you said at the beginning of the setup you have to do, or sometimes it's just a natural flow that you do on a daily basis when you have micro window time, and you can go back and improve it. And those micro window reinforce your standard or your discoverability and reuse your context switch over time. So you rebalance out any given day, the consistent drag of context switch with a consistent work. So it's fixed in a way if you can do that right.
Leslie.
Yeah, I have a question for us to discuss. So we talked about metrics in a couple of angles, but in terms of more like qualitative like feedback for improving like context switching, which for me, I'm thinking this from the perspective of like developer platform feedback. So I'm curious, like, if anyone uses that in their organization? We do, I can talk about it, but I'm always curious how other people do it, especially if they're not in platform engineering, like core platform engineering teams.
So I can tell you a bit about my context. So a few years ago, I was at a company called On2, and we would do like quarterly, no, every 2 months, sort of like survey. And one of the questions was about like the developer friction. We call it. It was like the label in the result was something like developer friction. But I think the question was some of the line is like, how is the environment helping you to do your job effectively? And obviously, it's it gives you a hint. It's not going to give you the answer. You don't know where it is. But when it go like when it's high enough and say, oh, that it kind of sucks, then you start looking and you start investing in trying to understand where to go. This is how we did it. I haven't done it since, but this is what we've done.
Yeah, we're getting ready to roll out developer experience surveys as well. It's the right time to do it. We're kind of hitting the stage where we have some capacity that we could address some developer workflow things and make ourselves faster. But before we got to that point, one of my favorite one-on-one questions is, if I gave you a week to work on anything that would make the rest of your job easier, what would you work on? And man, those answers come out in spades when you give somebody an open question like that. You'll hear exactly about what's making work painful for folks.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, I like that question. Because in my experience, I use some sort of development experience feedback in some sort of shape. And yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag of results. And I think that actually it depends from the size organization and where the problem is. But I would say that at least for up to mid-size organization, so within maybe 100 and something engineers, a lot of the problems are actually fixable by the team that is experiencing. They don't have to rely. So it's about mostly let them feel they're empowered and, to do it with an agreement. You need to be much bigger than actually your problem here is fixed 3 steps down the line. And really, so all the time I was working with this feedback, say, well, okay, that's great. You know it. You can fix it. It's in your power. It's your system. It's your environment. It's your backup. It's your, whatever it's going to be. What are you going to do it? What's the first iteration? And work with them to make that happen.
Yeah, we're actually about getting ready to roll out a cool down week every 3 cycles. So basically every 7th week, the engineering team has a week to kind of work on whatever they want to, whether it's a new product feature they're excited about, or the part I'm excited about is digging into these things that make work harder. Just specifically making some time on the calendar to go and grease the machinery, help things move faster, more smoothly. So to your point of it's your system, you have the agency to go and fix it. Okay, now you have the time too. So show me what you're going to do with it.
Leslie, then back to your question. How do you do it?
Combination of ways, definitely, especially if it's a larger org, right? Because like you have to get feedback at like multiple layers, right? Like there's like the department wide, the organizational wide, like the team wide. And team, I mean, it's the easiest if you're like the manager or the member on it because you typically you don't have more than 10 people on your smallest team, right? So, for that, like when I'm like leading people, I typically use like a similar tactic. It's like in my one-on-ones, like asking like using that basically as kind of my like user interview, but it's, with the coworker. So it feels weird to say it that way, but like I kind of treat it that way mentally and that like I'm looking for feedback in the same sort of way that I would with any customer. Like it doesn't, because I know, I try not to have my own opinions sort of cloud also like whether I, think whether I agree with them and whatnot. And then now at the organizational level, like I mean, I'm on SRE, so I'm very cross. I work across teams a lot. So getting feedback, qualitative feedback that's meaningful there is definitely harder. Like it takes a lot of time, just frankly. So it's usually those only happen when I'm looking for like a very specific like topic, like our observability story, like what are the actual friction points there? Like where are they spending time context switching and whatnot? I also do so I mentioned the on-call sort of dedication. A lot of times the idea is also that it's supposed to be a time of freedom for them to prioritize whatever they want, both because that tells me like, oh, what are the issues they want to fix? Because if they're spending time during their on-call shift fixing things, then you can make the assumption that that was important to them at least somewhat, right? So I think for me, it's always about having like multiple sort of qualitative feedback loops. And then like from there, it's it does become kind of more of a like qualitative like analysis of some sort there is no like here's how to do it correctly necessarily. I mean, academia hasn't figured it out, so I'm always looking for ways to do it and improve it. But so that's why I asked the question.
Another question that actually popped in my mind just now, so a really open floor to whoever has something in mind is I spend a lot of time working with extreme programming. So that is more synchronous. So you will pair program, you will not do pull requests, you will work on trunk. Now most company work more asynchronous. So they work on something in isolation, then they ask for a pull request, and then they wait. And then while they wait, potentially they pick another card. So, has any of you work on trying to minimize the impact of asynchronous? I know asynchronous has a good, some good thing behind it, but like obviously increase work in progress, and it may decrease cycle time. So I'm wondering if any of you have tried to tackle it.
I can start. Yes, of course. The thing is, it's a very relevant topic, and I would say not an easy one to solve. But I agree with you that, a degree of synchronicity helps in reducing content switch and supporting flow. And I think that part of the work is like if you're remote as a business, or if you have an element of asynchronicity that is good, that's valuable to create a space, is being clear which parts you want to have be in sync between two members of the same team or all the same team, and making clear the value you have. Like, well, if you pair, well, that's an easy game because you have your review in real time, and that's much easier to move forward. For this type of problems, even if you pair, maybe you want another pair of eyes, so that's okay. Go for the async and wait and accept the delay. But that's definitely an area that I invest a lot of time to help people to work in a sync fashion, even in a remote first environment, or also in a place where async work is very welcome. Help understand flip it. we're sync, but for these things, we want to be sync, and we structure in a way to be sync.
Code reviews are a really hard one to solve, right? Because keeping one person in context means taking somebody else out of context to do the review. And so, I think one of the things we've done that's helped with this is the idea of always be working on one and briefing another. So there's always other things that are coming up and that you're going to be working on soon. There's always prep work on those things, customer context to read, conversations to have. That's great filler work for while you're waiting on a PR review or you're waiting on something to happen so that you can get your code deployed. We also have a nice backlog of quick win stuff that we're working to operationalize to kind of fill the same sort of cracks. So that, if you're going to do some context switching, if you need something else to work on while you're waiting on a PR review, great. What work do we have that will fit in that crack precisely so that then you don't have two things in flight that are long running?
I'm a big fan of discovery, very quick, technical discovery if you have that async time, because there'll always be a piece of the system that requires a bit of refactoring or rethinking. But the first step is not just go and hammering code, it's thinking how that will go. And you have a window, have a look at that, think about that. And when the window's over, go back to your thing. But in the meantime, you start building some knowledge. Write down your understanding, write down what you're learning, right? So then when it's becoming the real piece, you have a foundational to do it. I'm with you on that.
Yeah,
Quick wins and those activities in those spaces have a lot of value.
Cool. One thing for me is I try synchronous code review as an approach to it doesn't solve the problem of code review that is anyway asynchronous, but you avoid the back and forward. I'm waiting for the comments and the comment come up and then you respond and then there isn't one. So if you just do it, you fix it together and it kind of reduces a bit of that. But we are unfortunately at the end of this panel, so let me wrap it up. So I heard that wrote down a lot of incredible contributions. Luca talked about essential accidental complexity. Leslie has talked about a framework to talk about preventive, proactive, and reactive. Nick, you gave me quite an interesting take in your question during one-to-one. I think it's a great question to ask. It's brilliant. A lot has been said, and we talk a lot about work in progress as well. And so my view and final take on this is, yes, work in progress, limiting work in progress is great in terms of reducing how many things people are doing at the same time. However, also focusing on your tooling kind of helps, because if someone really has to spend, I don't know, an hour waiting for the test to run, probably is going to pick something else. So, I think both consideration need to be taken. And finally, Leslie, Nick, Tim, Luca, thank you so much. Thank you much for the insight today. And now, in case there are questions, we're going to head over to the Slack channel, Engineering Velocity channel. And thank you for joining, and we hope to see you next time.